Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Haverkamp, and I am attempting, well, I've actually had to re-record this a few times to get it to work, so we will see. I'm going to share my screen with a PowerPoint, mainly to kind of keep myself on track as I take you through the interview assignment. So, other times I recorded this too, I was way over the time, so I'm going to keep on track with a timer, and hopefully I'm not speeding through things too fast, but if I am, please just ask a question in the comments and I can respond in that way. So today I'm going to start by talking about who I interviewed and why I chose this person, the cultural identities that are salient to this individual, their experiences with discrimination and prejudice, their definition of cultural competence, along kind of with mine, and then the questions that I chose to ask that I added to the interview protocol, and just my overall takeaways. So the person that I chose to interview is a heterosexual, cisgendered male. He identifies as male and prefers male as his pronoun, or he as his pronoun, I should say. This person actually happens to be the boyfriend of my younger sister. What is kind of interesting about him is I have never met him before prior to this interview assignment. This was essentially our very first time meeting through Zoom when I conducted the interview, which was kind of an experiment in and of itself, which I'll talk about later. But that is kind of a side reason why I chose him. Not only does he identify with another culture, but he also works in the healthcare industry. He is a radiology technician and works in a hospital. So I thought that would kind of jive with the entire message of our class. And then also another interesting dynamic that this individual has is they are white passing. So if you look at the color of his skin, he would probably appear to be Caucasian. But lo and behold, he actually does identify as being Mexican. And that is a very huge part of his cultural identity and what informs his everyday life. So kind of those dynamics, but really because I wanted to kind of understand what it was like to meet somebody on this cultural level and learn these very deep cultural aspects of their life before actually meeting them in person, and how that kind of changes the dynamic of the relationship for positive or negative. I'm perceiving it to be positive, but we can talk about that as I get through as well. So the cultural identities that are salient to the person that I interviewed are Mexican and white. In his words, he says that he is half and half. I am half white, I am half Mexican. I asked if he preferred the term Hispanic or anything like that, and he said no. I think of myself as white and Mexican. He also told me that he identifies with the Basque culture, which was not anything that was known to me. So apparently, when he was in elementary school, or maybe it was middle school, the teacher recognized his last name and it had double R's. And she recognized that name as being a Basque name, to which she kind of educated him on that culture, and then he educated himself. It's a region between Spain and France. They have their own language. From my understanding, it is a very old culture. He doesn't necessarily practice the cultural rituals or anything, but it's a part of his identity that he finds very fascinating and likes to share with people. And then if you want to get really nitty gritty, he also believes that he is Irish and German as far as like heritage or ethnicity or kind of cultural roots, but mainly it's that Mexican culture and the white culture that he predominantly identifies with. He also, when we talked about expanded definitions of culture, he shared with me that he would consider himself a video gamer and identifies with that culture pretty heavily, and then also is an only child and a child of divorced parents, which he believes were also very salient in determining his identities and what was important to him and things like that. Discrimination. So this was kind of a big question. I was actually nervous to ask him because I just don't genuinely know him and I didn't want to push him too hard to share too much or be uncomfortable. But he did share with me that he has faced discrimination, especially in his formative years growing up. He was made fun of for being Mexican. However, it was mostly only when he told people about his ethnicity that he was made fun of, because from the outside looking in, he looks white. As I mentioned, he is white passing. A story that he shared with me that is very distinct, kind of one of his main memories of discrimination, wasn't even necessarily towards him, but towards Mexican people in general. When he had his first girlfriend, so think, late kind of mid teens, going into that high school age. He was on his way to a sporting event with her, and her father was driving them. And like I said, looking at this individual, you probably would assume that he's white. And this father made that assumption and was making racist remarks against Mexican people, in which his girlfriend spoke up and said, you know, my friend here is Mexican. Please don't say that. And that was good of her. But he said he remembers just sinking in that chair in the car and wishing she didn't even say anything, because at that time in his life, he would rather not have the confrontation and not even bring it up, and even just take those comments rather than say anything. And that's something that he believes that he kind of regrets, but also kind of attributes that to age and maturity. And now he certainly would not want to let those comments slide. Not that he is confrontational, but likes to take the opportunity to educate others and remind people that a lot of white passing people have cultural identities that are not strictly white. So be careful the remarks that you make. I asked him what cultural competence meant to him, and this is what he had said, quote, being aware of your own culture while being willing to learn about other cultures, not being ethnocentric and realizing the uniqueness of other cultures, not limiting oneself to a bubble and continuing to learn about other cultures. I liked that this involved the word continuing, because I feel like that's a theme in our class. We want to continue. It's a spectrum, it's a continuum. The learning never ends. You may be familiar, and then a culture might change, and you may have to refamiliarize yourself. So I enjoyed that he kind of shared that it's a ongoing process, and I share that belief with him. The questions that I asked him briefly before I run out of time is, because he works in healthcare, he works in a hospital in Lubbock, Texas. I asked, have you had any cultural competence training, specifically as a healthcare worker and then just in general? And to both of those, he answered, no, he had not. And I was genuinely kind of shocked. I figured, especially down south in Texas, where there's a lot of Spanish speaking individuals, a lot of different cultures there that are present. I thought for sure that would be something that he would have encountered, and he said no. And then I asked him, well, I was going to ask him if the training he had received seemed effective, but he didn't receive any. So then I modified my question to, would cultural competence training be beneficial in your opinion? And he said, absolutely, without a doubt, yes. He actually shared with me a story where there was a Muslim family in the hospital where he worked, and they were there as patients. And they were a married couple, and the wife was going to give birth. And the father was very adamant that he did not, for religious reasons, want any men aside from the practitioner in the room. And that was not well received at that time by staff. They thought that he was rude. They just were maybe not understanding that he wasn't just wanting his way. He was asking this of them because it was a deeply embedded cultural belief. It was a very important to him. So the person that I interviewed was saying, had people had more empathy, had people understood where he was coming from, or at least tried to, or understood that this was coming from a place of belief from culture, as opposed to just wanting your way, they overall would have probably received a lot better care, which I think is also extremely important. And a theme, again, that is kind of run through this course, which is a takeaway and why I enjoyed rounding out the interview in that sense. It kind of tied in everything we've learned. Cultural competence, empathy, understanding can go a long ways. Remembering that you cannot make assumptions about anybody, even if the color of their skin seems so obvious that they're of one race. You cannot make any cultural assumptions about them, because their identity might be very different than how they appear. I perceived this entire process to be very positive, and I'm very fascinated to see how our relationship will move forward now that I understand him on a cultural level. So I'm grateful that this assignment afforded me that ability. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I look forward to your comments.